The cafeteria was packed, heat rising off bodies, metal trays scraping against concrete tables. In the corner, alone, silent, sat the new black inmate. No threats, no attitude, just a quiet stillness that made him look almost invisible. And invisible men are the ones bullies love the most. 3 inmates walked over, smirking, blocking the light around him. Their leader leaned forward, let saliva gather on his tongue and spit straight into the man's food. The tray shook. Soup splashed. Laughter exploded across the room. "Eat it," the bully sneered. "Come on, you're used to swallowing worse." Another inmate knocked the spoon away. A third shoved the man's shoulder, trying to get a reaction. Anything. But the man didn't blink, didn't breathe differently, didn't even rise from his seat. He wiped the spit from his tray with a napkin. Slow, calm, almost respectful. And that terrified the few inmates watching from afar. Because only 2 kinds of people stay calm like that in prison. Men who are broken. Men who have killed enough people to know they don't need to prove anything. The bully slammed his hands on the table. "You deaf or something, old man?" I said. He never finished, because the inmate finally looked up. One glance. Cold. Measured. A predator reading his prey. And in that instant, the bullies realized something was wrong. Very wrong. Those weren't the eyes of an ordinary inmate. Those were the eyes of a man trained to eliminate threats in silence. A man whose past was drenched in missions no one talked about. A man the military once called the ghost of Fallujah. But the bullies didn't know that yet. They were about to find out. Stay with me until the end. Because what this ex-Navy SEAL did next inside that cafeteria left every bully, every inmate, and every guard speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. His name was Marcus Thompson, 42 years old, serving 8 years for armed robbery. But that's where the official records ended. What they didn't tell you was that Marcus had spent 15 years in the most classified operations the Navy ever conducted. Missions that didn't exist on paper, targets that disappeared without explanation, and a kill count that would make seasoned soldiers question their own courage. The bullies had no idea they were messing with a man who once infiltrated terrorist compounds alone. A man who could kill 7 different ways using nothing but a plastic fork. A man whose silence wasn't weakness. It was the calm before annihilation. But here's what makes this story truly incredible. Marcus wasn't in prison because he was a criminal. He was there because he chose to be. 6 months earlier, Marcus had been living quietly in Detroit. No family, no close friends, just the ghosts of missions that haunted his sleep and a small apartment overlooking the river. He worked construction during the day, avoided crowds at night, and tried to forget the things he'd done in the name of national security. Then everything changed when he witnessed something that would destroy his peace forever. Marcus was walking home from a late shift when he heard screaming from an alley. 3 men had cornered a teenage girl. She couldn't have been older than 16. They were dragging her toward a van, covering her mouth, laughing about what they planned to do next. Any normal person would have called the police, waited for help, hoped someone else would handle it. But Marcus wasn't normal. He was a weapon disguised as a man. He moved like smoke through the darkness. The first attacker never saw him coming. A precise strike to the throat dropped him instantly. The second man turned just in time to see Marcus's fist before his world went black. The third tried to run. That was a mistake. Marcus caught him within 20 feet. What happened next lasted 3 seconds and left the man paralyzed for life. The girl was safe. The attackers were neutralized. Justice had been served with surgical precision. But here's the problem with being a ghost. Sometimes people see you anyway. A security camera caught fragments of the encounter. Not enough to identify Marcus clearly, but enough to show that whoever intervened possessed military-level combat skills. The police launched an investigation. The media called him a vigilante hero, and Marcus realized his quiet life was over. He could have disappeared, changed his identity, vanished into another city, another state, another existence entirely. His training had prepared him for that scenario 100 times over. Instead, he made a choice that shocked everyone who knew his story. Marcus walked into a convenience store 3 blocks from his apartment. He pulled out an unloaded pistol, demanded the cash register be opened, and waited calmly for police to arrive. He didn't take a single dollar, didn't hurt the terrified clerk, didn't even raise his voice. When officers surrounded the building, Marcus walked out with his hands raised and a confession ready on his lips. The judge sentenced him to 8 years. The media called it justice. The prosecutor celebrated another successful conviction. But Marcus had achieved exactly what he wanted. He'd traded his freedom for something more valuable: invisibility. In prison, no one would look for the ghost of Fallujah. No one would connect a simple armed robber to classified military operations. And most importantly, no one would ask questions about the skills he possessed, or so he thought. Prison has its own ecosystem, its own hierarchy, its own rules that have nothing to do with the law and everything to do with survival. And in that ecosystem, weakness gets you killed, while strength gets you respect. Marcus wanted neither. He kept to himself during his first 3 weeks, ate alone, exercised alone, slept with one eye open and both hands ready to defend himself. He spoke only when spoken to, followed every rule precisely, and gave no one any reason to notice him. But prisons are like small towns. Everyone eventually learns everyone else's business. And Marcus had made one critical error in his plan. He'd underestimated how his very presence would affect the delicate balance of power inside those concrete walls. The first sign of trouble came during his 2nd week. Marcus was reading in his cell when his cellmate, a nervous kid named Tommy, started asking questions. "You don't talk much, do you?" Marcus looked up from his book. "No. Most guys, they come in here scared or angry or trying to prove something. You just seem, I don't know, different." "Different how?" Tommy scratched his head, searching for words. "Like you've seen worse things than this place." Marcus returned to his reading. "We've all seen things." But Tommy wasn't finished. "My cousin was in Afghanistan. Marines. He came back changed, you know? Wouldn't talk about what happened over there. Had this look in his eyes sometimes, like he was somewhere else entirely. You got that same look." Marcus closed his book and faced his cellmate directly. "Your cousin talk about classified operations to strangers?" "No, sir." "Then neither do I." The conversation ended there. But Marcus realized his cover was already compromised. Prison inmates might not be educated, but they weren't stupid. They could recognize danger even when it tried to hide. And danger, in prison, always attracts attention. The attention came in the form of 3 men who controlled the cafeteria, the yard, and most of the contraband that flowed through the facility. Their leader was a massive man named Bull Morrison, 6'4", 260 pounds of muscle and scar tissue earned through 20 years of violence. Bull had killed 2 men on the outside, and 3 more since arriving at the prison. The guards looked the other way because Bull kept order among the inmates. The warden appreciated that Bull's crew prevented riots and maintained discipline. And Bull enjoyed the power that came with being the unofficial king of a concrete kingdom. But kings don't stay kings by ignoring potential threats. And Marcus Thompson, with his military bearing and dangerous calm, represented the biggest threat Bull had encountered in years. Bull's first move was subtle. He sent one of his lieutenants, a wiry man named Snake, to test Marcus during yard time. Snake approached with a cigarette dangling from his lips, sizing up the new fish who'd been making waves without throwing a single punch. "Heard you got disrespected in the cafeteria yesterday," Snake said, leaning against the fence where Marcus was doing pull-ups. "That's Bull's territory, you know. He runs things there." Marcus completed another rep, muscles barely straining under his body weight. Good for him. Thing is, when somebody gets punked in Bull's house and don't do nothing about it, makes Bull look weak. Makes his whole operation look weak. Marcus dropped from the bar, wiping sweat with his shirt. "And?" Snake stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the tobacco on his breath. And Bull don't like looking weak. So either you handle your business with those boys who spit in your food, or Bull's gonna handle his business with you. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Around the yard, other inmates pretended to exercise while watching the exchange. Everyone knew Snake spoke for Bull. Everyone understood what this conversation really meant. Marcus nodded slowly. Tell Bull I appreciate his concern, but I handle my own problems. That ain't how it works here, fish. You're either with Bull or you're against him. And being against Bull means you're against all of us. Marcus picked up his water bottle, took a long drink, then looked Snake directly in the eyes. Then I guess I'm against all of you. The words were spoken so quietly, so calmly, that Snake almost missed them. When they registered, his face twisted with anger and something else. Uncertainty. Because Marcus hadn't said it like a man making empty threats. He'd said it like a man stating a simple fact. Snake backed away, muttering curses, but Marcus was already walking toward the building. The confrontation was over, but the war had just begun. That night in his cell, Marcus lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Tommy was snoring softly on the bottom bunk, oblivious to the storm brewing around his cellmate. Marcus had faced impossible odds before. Outnumbered, outgunned, deep behind enemy lines with no backup coming. But this was different. In the military, he'd had rules of engagement, chain of command, clear objectives and exit strategies. In prison, there were no rules except the ones enforced by violence. No backup except what you could provide for yourself. No exit strategy except survival. Marcus had survived 15 years of classified operations by thinking 3 steps ahead of his enemies, so he began planning. Bull Morrison controlled the prison through fear and violence, but his power structure had weaknesses. Like any organization, it depended on loyalty, respect, and the belief that the leader was untouchable. Remove any of those elements, and the entire system would collapse. Marcus wasn't planning to fight Bull's army. He was planning to destroy it from within. The next morning brought the first test of Marcus's strategy. During breakfast, the same 3 bullies who'd spit in his food approached his table again. But this time, they weren't alone. 6 more inmates flanked them, all wearing the same cocky grins that said they owned this place. Well, the leader said, sliding into the seat across from Marcus. Look who's still eating in our cafeteria. Marcus continued cutting his pancakes with precise, measured strokes. Good morning. The casual response threw the bully off balance. He'd expected fear, anger, maybe even begging. Instead, Marcus acted like they were old friends meeting for breakfast. You think you're funny, old man? You think ignoring Bull's message makes you tough? Marcus took a bite of pancake, chewed slowly, then dabbed his mouth with a napkin. I think Bull's message was received. I also think Bull doesn't understand who he's dealing with. One of the other bullies slammed his fist on the table. You about to find out who you're dealing with, fish? But their leader held up a hand, studying Marcus with new interest, because something about the man's calm confidence suggested this wasn't going to be the easy beatdown they'd planned. All right, the leader said. I'll bite. Who are we dealing with? Marcus finished his orange juice, wiped his mouth again, then folded his hands on the table. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to giving orders that meant life or death. You're dealing with someone who's killed more people than everyone at this table combined. Someone who's been in situations that would break your minds just thinking about them. Someone who came to this prison for peace and quiet, but apparently isn't going to get either. He paused, letting the words sink in. Now, I've got 2 choices. I can keep trying to mind my own business while you boys keep poking the bear. Or I can show you exactly why the Navy spent 15 years training me to eliminate problems like you. The cafeteria had gone quiet. Not completely silent. That would have attracted guard attention, but quiet enough that conversations dropped to whispers. Everyone sensed something was about to happen. The bully leader's confidence wavered. Marcus hadn't raised his voice or made any threatening gestures, but something in his tone, his posture, his absolute stillness screamed danger to anyone with survival instincts. "You threatening us?" Marcus smiled for the first time since arriving at the prison. It wasn't a friendly smile. "No, I'm educating you." He stood up, gathered his tray, and walked toward the disposal area. As he passed the group of bullies, he paused just long enough to add, "Tell Bull that if he wants to test me, he should come himself next time. Sending children to do a man's job is beneath both of us." Then he was gone, leaving 9 confused and increasingly nervous inmates to wonder what they'd just encountered. Because Marcus Thompson had just done something unprecedented in that prison. He'd walked away from a fight he could have won, showed strength through restraint, and sent a message that would reach Bull Morrison within the hour. The ghost of Fallujah was done hiding, and Bull Morrison was about to learn why some men earned legends, while others just earned graves. Bull Morrison received the message 30 minutes later while counting protection money in his cell. Snake delivered it word for word, watching his boss's face turn darker with each sentence. He said, "What?" Bull's voice was barely a whisper, but everyone in the cell block could feel the danger radiating from his words. "Said you should come yourself next time. Called us children." Bull stood slowly, all 260 pounds of muscle and fury rising like a storm. In 20 years of violence, no one had ever dismissed him so casually. No one had ever walked away from his crew without consequences, and no one had ever suggested he was hiding behind others. "This fish thinks he's special because he served his country." Bull cracked his knuckles, each pop echoing like gunshots. "Time to show him what real war looks like." But Snake shifted nervously. "Boss, there's something else." The way he said it, about killing more people than all of us combined. "I think he might be serious." Bull backhanded Snake so hard the smaller man crashed into the wall. "You scared of some old man who reads books and does pull-ups? He bleeds just like everyone else." What Bull didn't understand was that Marcus had been counting on exactly this reaction. Anger made men predictable. Pride made them stupid. And Bull Morrison was about to prove both points in the most violent way possible. That afternoon in the yard, Bull made his move. He approached Marcus during weight training, flanked by 8 of his most trusted soldiers. The entire yard went silent. Even the guards tensed, sensing something big was about to happen. Marcus was bench pressing 200 pounds with steady, controlled movements. He didn't acknowledge Bull's presence, didn't alter his rhythm, didn't show any sign he'd noticed the small army surrounding him. "You got something to say to me, fish?" Bull's voice carried across the yard like thunder. Marcus completed his set, racked the weight, and sat up. He grabbed his towel, wiped his face, then finally looked at Bull Morrison with the same calm expression he'd worn in the cafeteria. "I said what needed saying." Bull's crew tensed, hands moving toward improvised weapons hidden in their clothes. Other inmates backed away, creating a circle around the confrontation. This was it, the moment that would determine the prison's power structure for years to come. "You disrespected me in front of my people," Bull said, stepping closer. "That requires payment." Marcus stood up, and for the first time, Bull realized the man wasn't as small as he'd seemed. Marcus was lean where Bull was massive, but there was something about his posture, balanced, ready, dangerous, that made Bull's survival instincts whisper warnings. Payment for what? Telling the truth? For thinking you're better than me? Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying Bull like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "I don't think I'm better than you. I know I am." The words hit Bull like physical blows. Around the yard, inmates gasped. No one talked to Bull Morrison like that and lived to tell about it. Bull's face turned purple with rage. "You about to learn why they call this place hell on earth?" "Actually," Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "you're about to learn why they called me the ghost of Fallujah." Bull swung with all his strength, a haymaker that would have decapitated most men. But Marcus wasn't most men. He moved like water, flowing around the punch with liquid grace. Bull's fist sailed through empty air while Marcus stepped inside his guard. What happened next lasted 3 seconds and changed everything. Marcus struck Bull's solar plexus with surgical precision, driving the air from his lungs. As Bull doubled over, gasping, Marcus grabbed his head and brought it down to meet his rising knee. The impact sounded like a gunshot across the silent yard. Bull Morrison, the king of the prison, the man who'd killed 5 people with his bare hands, dropped like a stone. But Marcus wasn't finished. He knelt beside Bull's unconscious form and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. When he wakes up, tell him the ghost sends his regards. Then Marcus walked away, leaving Bull's 8 soldiers staring at their fallen leader in shock. None of them moved to help him. None of them challenged Marcus. They just stood there, watching their entire world collapse in the space of 3 seconds. The guards rushed in, shouting orders, calling for medical assistance. But Marcus was already back at his cell, reading his book as if nothing had happened. Within an hour, the entire prison knew what had occurred. Bull Morrison, the untouchable king, had been knocked unconscious by the quiet new inmate who called himself a ghost. The power structure that had controlled the facility for years was crumbling, but Marcus knew the real fight was just beginning. That night, Tommy couldn't stop asking questions. "How did you do that? I mean, Bull's huge, and you just, bam, lights out." Marcus turned a page in his book without looking up. Physics. Physics? Force equals mass times acceleration. Bull had mass, I had acceleration. Tommy shook his head in amazement. "You're not really just a cook, are you?" Marcus finally looked at his cellmate, and Tommy saw something in those eyes that made him understand why Bull Morrison was currently in the medical wing with a concussion. "I'm whatever I need to be." The next morning brought consequences. Marcus woke to find his cell door already open and 3 guards waiting outside. They weren't there to congratulate him. "Warden wants to see you," the lead guard said, hand resting on his baton. Marcus dressed slowly, deliberately, knowing that every inmate was watching through their cell bars. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with fear, a few with calculation, wondering if they could use his reputation for their own purposes. The warden's office was sterile and cold, decorated with certificates and photographs that spoke of a career built on managing violent men. Warden Patricia Hayes was a small woman with steel in her spine and intelligence in her eyes. She'd seen every type of inmate, every kind of violence, every possible manipulation, but she'd never seen anything quite like Marcus Thompson. "Sit down, Thompson." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Marcus took the chair across from her desk, maintaining perfect posture even in handcuffs. "Bull Morrison is in the hospital wing with a severe concussion. 3 witnesses say you attacked him without provocation. 3 witnesses are lying." Warden Hayes opened a file on her desk. "According to your record, you're serving 8 years for armed robbery. First offense. Model prisoner so far. No disciplinary issues, no gang affiliations, no violence." She paused, studying his face. "But yesterday you nearly killed the most dangerous inmate in my facility, using what the guards described as professional-level combat skills." Marcus said nothing. "So I did some digging, called some friends at the Pentagon, asked about Marcus Thompson, age 42, formerly of Detroit." She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his face. "Interesting thing about military records, Thompson. Most of them are public information. Yours aren't. In fact, your file is so classified that just asking about it triggered 3 different security protocols." Marcus remained silent. "Now, I don't know what you did for Uncle Sam, and frankly, I don't care. What I care about is maintaining order in my prison. And right now, you're disrupting that order. Bull Morrison disrupted the order when he sent his people after me. Bull Morrison maintained order through intimidation. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Now he's unconscious and his crew is scattered. You know what that means?" Marcus nodded. "Power vacuum." "Exactly. And power vacuums in prison get filled with blood." She was right, of course. Marcus had calculated this outcome before making his move. Removing Bull would create chaos, and chaos would create opportunities. But chaos also meant innocent people would get hurt. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. Warden Hayes smiled for the first time since he'd entered her office. "I want you to finish what you started." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Bull's crew is already fracturing. 3 different groups are positioning themselves to take over. Within a week, we'll have a war on our hands, unless someone establishes dominance quickly." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. "I'm transferring you to a single cell in Block C. Better security, more privacy, closer to the library. In exchange, you keep the peace." Marcus read the transfer order, understanding the subtext. She was offering him protection and privileges in exchange for becoming the prison's new enforcer. "And if I refuse? Then you go to solitary confinement while I investigate yesterday's incident. Could take months to sort out all the witness statements and security footage." Marcus looked at the transfer order again. Block C was where they kept the high-value prisoners. Mob bosses, cartel leaders, men whose safety was worth more than their punishment. It was also where Marcus could observe the entire prison's operations while planning his next moves. "I accept." Warden Hayes nodded approvingly. "Good choice, but Thompson..." She waited until he met her eyes. "I don't know what kind of monster the military turned you into, but in my prison, that monster follows my rules. Step out of line, and I'll bury you so deep in the system, you'll forget what sunlight looks like." Marcus stood, still handcuffed, still calm. "Understood." As the guards escorted him toward Block C, Marcus reflected on how perfectly everything was falling into place. He'd eliminated Bull Morrison, gained the warden's trust, and positioned himself at the center of the prison's power structure. Now came the real challenge: maintaining control without becoming the very thing he'd sought to escape. Because Marcus Thompson hadn't come to prison to become another king. He'd come to disappear. But sometimes, the only way to remain invisible is to hide in plain sight. And sometimes, the only way to find peace is to wage war on those who would destroy it. The transfer to Block C took effect immediately. Marcus's new cell was twice the size of his old one, with a window that actually let in natural light. His new neighbors were a collection of the prison's most dangerous and influential inmates, men who commanded respect through intelligence rather than just violence. But respect in prison, Marcus was learning, came with its own set of problems. His first night in Block C, Marcus discovered what real power looked like behind bars. His new cellmate wasn't some nervous kid like Tommy. This was Vincent Caruso, a 70-year-old man whose gentle demeanor masked 40 years of organized crime leadership. Vincent read philosophy books, spoke in whispers, and commanded more respect than Bull Morrison ever had. "You're the one who dropped Bull," Vincent said, without looking up from his book. It wasn't a question. Marcus settled onto his bunk, noting how Vincent's side of the cell was arranged with military precision. Clean, organized, efficient. Word travels fast. Word travels faster when it's interesting. And you, my friend, are very interesting. Vincent marked his page and set the book aside. When he turned to face Marcus, his eyes held the same calculating intelligence that Marcus recognized in himself, the look of a man who'd made life and death decisions without blinking. "Bull was a useful animal," Vincent continued. "Kept the young lions from tearing each other apart. But animals are unpredictable. They bite the hand that feeds them. You, on the other hand, you're something else entirely." Marcus began unpacking his few belongings. "And what am I?" Vincent smiled, revealing teeth too perfect to be natural. "You're a professional. Question is, professional what?" Before Marcus could answer, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the cell block in dim red illumination. From somewhere in the darkness came sounds that Marcus recognized immediately. The wet thuds of violence, muffled screams, bodies hitting concrete. "Begin sooner than I expected," Vincent murmured, lying back on his bunk as if listening to classical music instead of carnage. Marcus moved to the cell door, peering through the reinforced glass. In the corridor, He could see shapes moving, inmates settling scores while the guards were mysteriously absent. Bull's removal had created exactly the power vacuum Warden Hayes had predicted, and different factions were making their moves under cover of darkness. "You could stop it," Vincent observed quietly. "Not my problem. Everything in here becomes your problem eventually. That's the nature of caged animals. We all share the same air, eat the same food, breathe the same violence." A scream echoed through the corridor, closer this time. Marcus watched through the glass as two inmates dragged a third past their cell. The victim's face was already unrecognizable, but Marcus could see he was still breathing, still conscious, still suffering. Vincent's voice drifted from the darkness behind him. "The boy they're killing is named David, 22 years old, armed robbery, just like you. First offense, gets letters from his mother every week, pictures of his baby daughter. He made the mistake of refusing to pick a side when Bull went down." Another scream, this one weaker. "In about 30 seconds, those men are going to beat David to death because he wanted to stay neutral. His little girl will grow up without a father. His mother will bury her youngest son. All because nobody stepped in to stop what could have been stopped." Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool glass. In Afghanistan, he'd had rules of engagement, clear objectives, chain of command. Here, the only rule was survival, and survival often meant watching innocents die. "The guards will come eventually," Marcus said, though he knew it wasn't true. "The guards are being paid to take their time tonight. This little war was always going to happen. Question is whether it lasts 5 minutes or 5 hours." The sounds were moving away now, down toward the showers where screams would echo off tile walls until they became something inhuman. Marcus could feel Vincent watching him in the darkness, measuring his response, calculating what kind of man he really was. "You want me to become Bull," Marcus said. "I want you to become better than Bull." Marcus turned from the window. In the red emergency lighting, Vincent looked like something out of an old movie. Wise, patient, dangerous. "And what do you get out of it?" Vincent's smile was barely visible in the dim light. "Peace and quiet. Same as you." The next morning brought news of the night's casualties. 3 dead, 7 hospitalized, dozens more injured in fights that had spread through 4 different cell blocks. The prison was on lockdown, with meals delivered to cells and no movement allowed between areas. Marcus sat on his bunk, reading the same page of his book over and over while processing what Vincent had told him during the long, violent night. The old man had laid out the prison's entire power structure. Who controlled what? Who owed favors to whom? Which guards could be bought and which ones couldn't be touched? More importantly, he'd explained why Marcus's victory over Bull had been so significant. Marcus Thompson entered that prison as a ghost, hoping to disappear into the shadows of concrete and steel. But some men carry too much darkness to ever truly hide. The bullies learned that lesson in 3 brutal seconds when they discovered that the quiet man in the corner wasn't broken. He was lethal. Bull Morrison ruled through fear until he met someone who had mastered it. The Ghost of Fallujah proved that true power doesn't come from size or reputation, but from the cold precision of a man who has stared death in the face and made it blink first. That's the story of how a Navy SEAL's quest for peace became a prison's lesson in consequence.